The story started when I saw the girl for a first time. She was tall and pretty, and looked she was the prettier of the entire ones standing. I had no idea what my father and I were doing there. Son, we are here for you. Since your mom left me, we are here to get you a mom. I wasn't really sure what was going on, and I said, "What is going on, Pop?" And he said, "I am here to get you a new stepmom." I was surprised with everything going on. I asked my father if it was the most necessary thing to do, and he said that he is. It was a Romanian bride shop, and all the girls here were from Romania, waiting to be wed and have an American green card. My father picked one of the fieriest brides he could. Her name was Rosalina, and she was very outspoken, and her English was quite broken. It wasn't very legal if anyone was wondering, but it wasn't something that people weren't aware of, hence my father knew about it. He was the most clueless man, and the fact that he heard about this and decided to act upon it was strange as it is. He did all the proceedings that were to be done to bring it to being closest to legal, and then went out to marry Rosalina. I was very skeptic of Rosalina. I knew she wasn't the best person to be around, but her presence cheered up my father a bit, and it was something that I would tolerate her for that. But she used to dress up like a pen girl for my father and joke around a lot. It was weird since she barely knew him or me. She got used to the part of being his wife. It was the stepmother part she was having trouble with. She was way younger than my father, but I guess the father issue she might have been clouded the judgment, but since she was only merely 10 to 15 years older than me, the stepmother part was something she wasn't getting used to and would often forget that boundary. Even though I made sure every single time to remind her of the boundary that she's so much pretty, much leaning on to cross every time. Even though my father was a great guy to her, there were just some things that he just wouldn't understand, and there I would come in to help her. I guess I was the only friend she had in that place, and then one day, while from her regular visit from the market she got back, she had a bruise in her eye, and she looked awfully pale and scared of everything happening in the moment. She came back all teary-eyed and told me what happened. She said that the Russian guys harassed her, and it was pretty clear why. She said that she knew them back from Europe, and her ex-husband rolls with them. She asked for my help, and I told her there's nothing I can do. And it was true, too. I cannot go on and be rivals with Russian mobsters. I gotta care about my neck. But she insisted on me doing something, so I decided to have a civilized talk with them, even though I was certain that there is a good chance that I might end up face down in the alleyway of Brooklyn somewhere. Few days later, I decided to head to Sergei's cleaner shop. I asked the man where to have a conversation with Sergei. At first he refused and said, "I don't know any Sergei." And then I replied, "Come on man, we are just two guys talking." I knew the game, and I knew what I was getting into, but I had to do it for the sake of my father and the stepmother, so I put in the theatrics I needed. The guy looked at me with the stern look, and I did back, and minutes later, he opened the coat drawer and let me in. There on the other side, I found myself in the club where a bunch of big muscular Russians were playing cards. "Hey, which one of you is Sergei?" I asked, and they all replied in sync, "I am." "Yeah, sure, play a wise guy and drop the biggest deal lead you will ever get in your life," I replied. One of the broodiest tall Russian guys stood up and said in his deep-pitched voice, "I am Sergei. What do you want?" And I replied, "Just plain and simple trade. You do something for me, and I do something for you." I was playing a very confident Italian, and things were strenuous initially. Then Sergei walked out to the gambling room and took me to an exclusive office. "Talk, Mussolini. What do you trade in?" said the grumpy Russian. I looked at him for a bit, contemplating all different ways that he can kill me. And then I said, "I trade in you doing me one solid, and I give you lead that will make you the biggest merchant on this island." He looked at me with disapproval and said, "I don't want to be a merchant, too much work. I would continue being the crook I am." And then I said, "Don't you worry, it's the same thing." He looked at me and asked, "How much are we talking here?" And I said, "Enough for you to buy a machine to count it." He asked, "What is the solid one that you want?" And then I showed him a picture of Rosalina, and he looked at me and asked, "What about her?" And I said, "Tell your men to leave her alone now and forever." And I started writing an address of the port in the New York where all the shipment arrives, and I told him, "Be by the dock at 9. The shipment will crack in at 9, and Boys in the Blue would be at 9:30. You have the 30-minute window to swipe the place clean." And then as I was leaving, he said, "All right, you got yourself a deal. Your lead works. You never hear from us. But if it doesn't work, you will hear from us." As I started walking away, I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I sure just went through hell for my stepmom. I wasn't really sure if it would work, but as I did exit, I had a real sense of fear that crippled my whole spine. I messed with the wrong tiger. I am overconfident and I barked the wrong tree. I wasn't made for this. As I got out, I straight away went to meet my stepmom and I told her that I talked to Sergey. She was scared for me and I told her not to worry. And then few days in, I finally got the news. The Russian mob was apprehended. Well before going to confront Sergey, 3 guys got me into the truck and wired me. And yeah, I played the rat in the conversation and got evidence against Sergey. And then in return through my tip, Sergey was apprehended red-handed. Good riddance. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
I believe it was the summer before I started high school. My mom's cleaning company was short a maid or 2. She figured it made more sense to make me work for my money rather than just hand over a bit every time I asked. Maybe she thought it would teach me the value of $1. I'm not sure. Whatever her motivations, I was hired to cover the phones. This was a test to see if I could handle the workload. I must have passed because I was moved over to cleaning once the school year began. 5 days a week after school and all day Saturdays, I followed her and the other girls around town cleaning people's homes and offices. This routine continued for 4 years of high school and college. At the end of it all, I had a business degree and a 50% piece in the company. Another 10 years would pass, and as Mom would step further away from the day-to-day running of the operations, I would take on more responsibility. Until one day when she handed me her keys and wished me good luck. The business became mine, and with it, all its headaches and heartaches. I never completely stopped going out on jobs. The work kept me fit and in good standing with my clients. If I told you I enjoyed the actual job, I'd definitely be lying. However, by the time I left high school, I'd become almost disconnected from it. After 20 years of cleaning toilets and kitchens, I figured I'd seen it all and nothing could ever get to me. That was until the call for the Pearson job. The man who called sounded like a kind and amiable old man, if not a bit spacey. It took a moment or two for him to get to his point, and it sounded like a run-of-the-mill house cleaning gig. What I saw when I arrived sticks with me to this day. I was met at the door by the old gentleman and led to a bedroom. The acrid scent coming from the room punched me in the gut and caused me to retch. While fighting the urge, I balked at the horrifying image before me. It appeared as if a tub full of blood had been splattered all about the room. The bed was by far the worst, soaked in an almost purple-tinted goo. One wall appeared to have a vast spray of blood and gray matter coating it. The horror of it overtook me and I ran across the hall into a bathroom and barfed up my lunch. It took a few minutes to compose myself. I stormed from the bathroom and confronted the man about what I had just seen. He hung his head for a moment, at first mumbling an apology, then looking up toward me, quietly allowing a tear to fall from the corner of his eye. "I'm sorry, young lady. I know it's an awful sight. I should have warned you. But I was afraid you'd turn around and leave. My grandson..." He took a long, ragged breath and began again. "My grandson took his life this morning. He did it in that room. I can't even bear to go in there. I know it must be shocking, a shocking sight to see, but I didn't know who else to call. My insurance won't pay for it, and the other company I called, the one the police gave me the card for, they wanted far more than I could afford. I knew my wife had used your company many years ago, and I liked it. I guess I hoped you could help me." I wasn't sure what to say. I felt horrible for this poor man, but this type of work was way beyond my ability, not to mention my comfort level. Crime scene cleanup companies made more because they had to deal with blood-borne diseases and pathogens and had the proper chemicals to dispose of bodily fluids properly. We continued to stare at one another, unsure of what to say. His eyes were now filled with tears. It was obvious what I had to do. I asked the gentleman for the cleaner's card. I spoke to them a moment and hung up. Before I could get the words out, I began to get choked up myself. I cleared my throat and began once more. "It's all taken care of, sir. Your family's been a good client in the past, and it's the least I could do." At that moment, I didn't actually remember the family, but it seemed an easy way to explain what I was doing. Although right that second I wasn't sure why I was doing it. "You don't have to worry about it. Consider it a thank you for the loyalty to our company." The old man's eyes lit up when I said this. His face was now one big, wet mess. "I don't know how to thank you, young lady. I didn't think there were kind people like yourself around anymore." He lunged upon me and wrapped me in a massive arms. I did the same, and we stood there for the next minute, locked in our mournful embrace. In an instant, we released one another, and I bid him goodbye.
My mother used to work in a hotel in Washington, D.C. back in the 90s as a housekeeper/maid, since she needed the money because she was a refugee from Vietnam. Even though she didn't speak much English at the time, she knew enough to get by at her job, and all the other staff and hotel guests loved her because of how sweet she was. Because of this, any high-profile guests, such as the Backstreet Boys, would stay at the hotel. The manager always sent my mum to clean the room, since she was so good at it. Anyway, one day a guest comes called Mr. Michelson. He checked into the most expensive suite. As usual, the manager told my mum to go take care of his room. As she got there was a "Do Not Disturb" sign, so she told the manager she would come back later. What was weird was that no one was ever allowed into his room. The man stayed for almost a month, and not once did he let staff come in to clean. However, he paid a lot, and gave a warm welcome every time he passed as staff member/housekeeper, so no one paid him any mind. Then one day came, when people didn't see him anymore, so they assumed he checked out. Even though the receptionist had no account of this, since it had been so long since the room was cleaned, and the "Do Not Disturb" sign wasn't on the door anymore, the manager told my mum to check it out, and to try and clean up what she could. As she got to the floor and unlocked the door to the room, a disturbing smell hit her. She couldn't figure it out, but she continued to survey the room, which was disgustingly messy. Her words were that it looked like someone had thrown a rave, even though no other guests seemed to have ever gone into the room besides Mr. Michelson. It had looked like he had deserted the place without telling anyone. My mum was still shocked by the smell, so she tried to track it down. As she followed her nose, she could tell it was coming from the hotel room closet. When she opened the closet, there was nothing but a cardboard box on the ground, from which the smell was resonating from. In that moment, from being a housekeeper, my mother's first instinct was to open the box and see what was in there, to clean and/or throw it out. When she opened the box, what she saw scarred her to this day. It was the rotting/decomposing head of a young woman, chopped off. My mother immediately screamed and got out of there, and fainted in the elevator. Once she woke up, cops were everywhere, and the hotel was like a CSI scene. The manager told her that the resident didn't leave his real name, and had used a fake credit card to check in. The head of the woman had been identified as a local sex worker. I never learnt the nitty-gritty details, but needless to say, my mum quit that same day.
At around 9:30 p.m. on the night of August 29th, 2002, 31-year-old Audrey Heron called home to excitedly announce that she'd gotten a raise. Her husband Jeff congratulated her on the good news, before Audrey told him she'd soon be finishing her nursing shift at the Columbia Green Long-Term Healthcare Facility in Catskill, New York, where Audrey worked part-time. It was fantastic news for the couple, as the extra income would make providing for their 2 children considerably easier. An hour and a half later, at around 11 p.m., Audrey said goodnight to her fellow nurses, headed out into the parking lot to her 1994 Jeep Grand Cherokee, then began the drive back home. She made the same commute to and from work every single day, driving back and forth along State Route 23 in the Jefferson Heights area of Catskill, and that night was no different. One coworker claims that Audrey drove behind her for a few minutes after leaving the office. Given that the weather that night was rainy and foggy, it wasn't long before she lost track of Audrey on the dark, rain-slick roads. The drive from the nursing facility to Audrey's home in Freehold, New York, is about 12 to 15 miles, so 20 minutes driving time at the very most. Audrey's husband expected her home at around 11:25, and he usually stayed up to greet her as she came through the door. But that night, Audrey didn't show. It wasn't entirely unusual for Audrey to have her shift extended at short notice, either to cover another nurse or because a patient required urgent care. So initially, Jeff didn't bat an eyelid at his wife's absence. He didn't even bother to call the hospital to make sure she was actually still there. He just went to bed at his usual time, completely unconcerned. Jeff later recounted that he woke up at around 2 a.m., the morning of August 30th, and noticed that Audrey was still not home. But again, due to the erratic nature of the job, he simply went back to bed assuming that there had been some kind of emergency. The following morning, Jeff awoke at around 6 a.m. to find that Audrey still hadn't returned home. He called the hospital, but was told that she'd left at 11 the previous night. He then called Audrey's mom, Shirley, and asked if she had stayed over at her place. Shirley had only just returned from a Florida vacation with Audrey's daughter from her first marriage, and naturally her mother was excited to be reunited with her, so it seemed only logical that Audrey had driven to her mother's that night. Only she hadn't. Shirley said that not only was Audrey not there, but she hadn't heard from her daughter at all since arriving back in New York State. Only then did it become evident that something was wrong, both Jeff and Shirley become increasingly concerned for Audrey's safety. At 10 a.m., an increasingly desperate Jeff got in touch with Audrey's stepmother, an ex-police officer, who helped him file a missing persons report. However, she also advised him to call around Audrey's friends to check if any of them had seen her. The first 48 hours are crucial in any missing persons investigation, and with any luck, Jeff might be able to locate her before anything untoward occurred. One of Audrey's friends, Karina, recalls getting a voicemail from Jeff at around 1 p.m. that day saying, "Hi Karina, it's Jeff Herron. We're having trouble locating Audrey. If you've heard from her, please call me. Thank you." Karina has since stated that the first thing that struck her about the voicemail was Jeff's unusual tone. For a man whose wife had been missing for more than 12 hours by that point, Karina claims he sounded remarkably indifferent. You'd expect him to be panicking and anxious, she said, but he just sounded all low and sad, almost resigned. It was only a day into the search and he sounded like he'd given up. Karina had been very vocal that Jeff did not sound concerned in this voicemail, just sad. Karina had wondered why Jeff didn't contact her earlier in the morning before Audrey was reported missing, as she was one of Audrey's best friends, and Audrey had stayed the night with her before. She also wondered why Jeff sounded low-toned and sad on the voicemail instead of panicked and concerned, considering it was less than a day into not being able to locate Audrey. Karina also noted that Jeff could be rather controlling sometimes, and that Audrey had talked of him checking up on her frequently if she went anywhere without him. So, according to her, the fact that he was content to remain in the dark regarding her whereabouts for almost 7 hours is extremely suspicious. On the evening of the day she was reported missing, Audrey's friends got together to walk the route she would have driven home that night, keeping their eyes peeled for any sign of her or her Jeep. Her friends theorized that because it was raining that night, Audrey had taken an alternate route due to the poor weather. But since they knew exactly which short road she would have turned down, they figured that they would find her and her car right away. but not a single sign of Audrey was found along the entire route, almost as if she and her vehicle had simply vanished into thin air. Law enforcement initially speculated that there had simply been some kind of automobile accident, given that Audrey seemed to have disappeared while driving. Officers were told to keep a sharp eye out for a black Grand Cherokee while they conducted a foot search covering a 12-mile radius. Their search penetrated deep into the woods, covering every home, road, and body of water that Audrey's Jeep could have possibly ended up. Even a helicopter was called in at one point to aid in the search. But not a single shred of evidence could be located, something that mystified officers after such an intensive and rigorous search. Although relatively rare in 2002, Audrey had a car phone installed in her Jeep. But then police officers tried pinging the phone's location, and they soon found that the phone had either been disconnected, deliberately switched off, or that it had died. The cops also discovered that Audrey's purse had been left at home, implying she'd forgotten to take it to work with her on the day of her disappearance. This too struck her friends as unusual. Her life was in that purse, and even if she'd forgotten it, she would have probably turned around to retrieve it. It made them suspect that she actually had gotten home that night, and that something had occurred after her arrival at home that has caused her disappearance. Investigators were able to pull only one security camera tape from the area where Audrey was last seen. We only had one grainy video from Cumberland Farms in which it appears that Audrey's vehicle does leave her place of employment and basically turns left, going west on Country Route 23B. That's the last of any kind of technological evidence we had, one senior investigator later reported. We can't confirm it's the vehicle, but it appears to be, because the quality of the video was very poor and very grainy, and it does appear to leave at the time that she would have ended work. In the years since Audrey's disappearance, the police have investigated well over 1,000 leads, but not a single one of them has ever led to an arrest or court conviction. There are a couple of persons of interest, but no direct link to her disappearance, stated investigating detectives. At this point, clearly we suspect foul play. It's clearly a very frustrating case for us because there are no solid leads to follow. In 1998, Audrey and Jeff had had their first child together, a bright-eyed baby girl named Katie. But within a year, rumors flew that Audrey was planning on leaving Jeff, taking Katie with her. Yet many have testified that Jeff did not treat Sanzia very well at all, who was Audrey's daughter from her first marriage. They claimed he had a habit of yelling at Sanzia, although the girl later explained that although Jeff was harsh with her at times, she described herself as a bratty child and felt that Jeff was a good stepfather overall. Jeff and Audrey, shortly after the latter, discovered that she was pregnant with her second child, Quinn, whom she gave birth to in 2000. Soon after this, the couple moved to Freehold, New York, and began building the house of their dreams on a golf course that Jeff's father owned. Life seemed serene for the couple after that, but when Audrey vanished, neither Jeff nor his family actively searched for her, outside of a few phone calls, and they didn't appear too emotionally shook up about it either. Jeff claimed he was perfectly cooperative during the investigation and contributed financially to a private search effort, but these claims are contradicted by several news outlets who argue that not only did he ignore them, but that his monetary donations to Audrey's friend's PI fund were pitiful. They claim that for a man that came from a very wealthy background, his donation of just $1,000 spoke volumes about his family's attitude towards his wife's disappearance. Although Jeff claims his reluctance to mount a serious campaign of public appeals was motivated by his desire to protect his children from the macabre maelstrom of rumors and accusations regarding the death of their mother. A few months after the media circus surrounding Audrey's disappearance had died down, representatives of the Montel Williams show reached out to Jeff to book an appearance. Characteristically, he declined, but Aubrey's circle of close friends jumped at the offer of re-exposing her case to the public. After all, anything that might produce new leads or clues was worth the effort, and they harshly resented Jeff for turning his back on such an opportunity. Then in 2017, Crime Watch Daily attempted to arrange an interview with him at his home. Again, he declined, but the wall of silence had been so prevailing by that point that Jeff's father agreed to participate. In a segment that aired later that year, he told Crime Watch that he firmly believed that his son had no involvement in his wife's disappearance, and that it would have been easy for someone to dispose of the Jeep to erase any evidence of a potential crime. During the same segment, a police investigator revealed that Jeff had partially completed a lie detector test during the initial investigation, but that his father had essentially pulled him out of it under the advice of his attorney. Some have viewed this as highly suspicious, but considering how inaccurate the test can be, and how a faulty reading could be used to gain a false conviction, Jeff's father could well have been right to stop the test. In the light of the fact that Jeff had permitted full police searches of his home on 3 separate occasions, it looks less and less likely that he's anything resembling the guilty party. Audrey's daughter from her first marriage, Sonja, who's not related by blood, has actually been very defensive of Jeff over the years and is a staunch believer in his innocence. She publicly stated that some of the media portrayals of her stepfather amounted to nothing but hit pieces of hack journalism that tried to sensationalize something deeply personal to her, and for all the wrong reasons. At first glance, there appears to have been no financial motivation for Jeff to disappear his wife. He came from a wealthy golf course-owning family, she had no life insurance, and she didn't have much in the way of savings either. But as you're about to hear, we can't rule out greed as a motivation for her murder. Jeff's father only partly owned the golf course that had made him rich. The other owner is a Russian national, one believed to be involved in serious organized crime, who also lived on the golf course not too far from Jeff and Audrey. Apparently, when police asked Jeff about the possibility of this mysterious Russian being involved in his wife's murder, he mentioned something curious. Audrey had mentioned walking in on an argument between the silent Russian partner, Ron, and a number of other men, who were exchanging harsh words and hushed voices. The men grew silent as soon as they detected her presence, and Audrey left feeling very intimidated. It's also been theorized that the golf course was nothing but a front for the Russian mafia, who in turn leached funds from the business until Jeff's father was in their pocket. If this was the case, Audrey's disappearance could have been meant as a warning to him of what would happen if he didn't pay up. Yet whether the murder was intentional, or Audrey died in the process of being taken, is entirely up for debate, as police have never deemed the theory worthy of investigation. In 2016, a tip came from a woman whose mother had worked at the very same healthcare facility as Audrey. She claimed that her brother had caught sight of Audrey on a handful of occasions while ferrying his mother to and from the hospice, and had developed a dangerous obsession with her. This man had a long history of indecent assault and attempted kidnapping, and he became one of the prime suspects in Audrey's disappearance. New York State Police ended up draining a pond near the man's Catskill home, while corpse-sniffing dogs scoured the nearby countryside. But like countless searches that had taken place before, not a single shred of evidence was found. However, both Shirley and Sonja believe this obsessive individual is to blame, and purport that he could have been hiding in her Jeep before Audrey got in to leave work that day, and because the back doors on her Jeep apparently did not lock, it's then that her abductor struck. Audrey was recorded on CCTV, departing her workplace with no unusual indicators, but what happened after she left the parking lot is anyone's guess. In light of such a theory, it's safe to say the police have ruled out the possibility of a car accident and are focusing on the sole possibility of foul play. They've also ruled out the possibility that Audrey simply ran away, given her promotion at work and how much she loved her job. She was also a devoted mother and led an active social life, suggesting that if she did run away, that she'd have informed a friend or taken her kids along with her. Over the years, many tips have come in from all over New York and neighboring states from people claiming to have spotted Audrey alive and well, but as you can imagine, nothing has ever come of any of them. What's frustrating about this case is that the number one suspect is essentially incapable of committing the crime. In order to successfully evade detection, Audrey's killer would have had the resources and time to dispose of a huge automobile and essentially disappear it from the face of the earth. This would have been nigh impossible for one single person to do, unless they had some kind of subterranean body shop at their disposal. But this would suggest a network of motivated, twisted individuals dedicated on abducting and disappearing those unfortunate enough to be caught on the roads at night. And if that really is a possibility, a rational way to explain this disappearance, then maybe none of us are as safe as we'd like to believe. We're supposed to feel safe in our vehicles, machines built with safety belts, airbags, and roll cages. But Audrey's disappearance shows that we're just as vulnerable as our forebears while on dark country roads. And just like back then, predators stalk the highways in search of fresh meat.